Hello, everybody, and welcome to the eighth leg of IULM FLOW, which is this series of talks that we are programming as IULM University to explore some of the most interesting and forward-looking aspects of culture and creative production of today. Today we have a great guest, Pietro Polsinelli, who's undoubtedly one of the most distinguished Italian game designers and developers. And the reason is that today we are putting the spotlight into Cyberpunk 2077. So I think that for everybody in the gamers community doesn't need any kind of introduction. Tomorrow is the day of the official release. Is one of the most long-awaited and craved, I think, games to be released in the past few years. And at the same time, this is also a really great opportunity to discuss about what is today the game design experience and more generally, what is the game experience? Because for a very long time, there has been this sort of stigma towards video games, like video games not being true culture, video games being something that could not really be compared not only to art, but to cinema, to make some obvious example. Things today are changing very quickly. The perception is completely different today. Even universities and serious places like us today tend to have video game studies. There are video game museums. There are even scientific journals for video games. So, I mean, even if this is probably the most boring part, there is even this serious counterpart. So the video games today are completely legitimate as a form of culture. And so it's really intriguing to open a conversation on this particular issue. Cyberpunk 2077, of course, it's making a very direct reference to a world that of science fiction, and in particular cyberpunk, which is probably one of the most important cultural spheres for narrative and innovation in the past few decades. And of course, there are very ancient for the gaming scale origin in the late 60s, at least to Philip K. Dick, as Pietro will clearly discuss, probably even older. I mean, in its deep roots, and science fiction in particular has been probably one of the most insightful ways to understand where our society was going, probably more than the contemporary social science of those years. Today, probably we really have a much more viable intuition from the science fiction of the 60s and the 70s about the kind of society we live in today than from the sociology, for example, or the economics of the 60s and the 70s. And in particular, of course, cyberpunk today, with this dystopian setting, could not be more up to date, because we are living in a kind of a dystopian present at the moment. And so probably this is not just about gaming, but it's also about developing a different glance at the reality we're living in. And not necessarily simply for evasion, but probably even for, again, reflection about also what lies ahead. It's interesting to stress, and then I'm quickly giving the floor to Pietro, but it's interesting to stress that this mega production that, as you probably know, arrives from one of the biggest production houses for gaming, which is Project Red. This particular production is a European one. We tend to think that generally gaming is about the Far East or is about the US, but as you probably know, there is a flourishing European industry of gaming, and the fact that in particular this production was staged in Wrocław, that in addition to being a thriving culture and creative city in Europe, has also been the European Capital of Culture 2016. And after that, by the way, it really knew a boost of the culture and creative industry there, makes us think also of the potential that for future professional development that the gaming industry has today in Europe. So it's also very important, and if we have some time, we will also give a shot to this with Pietro. It's also important to reflect how important it is today, for example, for Europe in particular, but of course our audience is not only European, but as Europeans, of course, we are particularly concerned how Europe could benefit from further development of this particular industry. Okay, so much for now, and I'm really happy to give the floor to Pietro for his presentation. Pietro, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And well, I have some notes and some slides, but I hope that this will be just a discussion between us. And in fact, you hinted to so many interesting themes. And well, one dimension I think that will be across all the slides and the theme is the role of narrative in all this, because it's what also characterize and makes this release particularly interesting, in my opinion, because yes, it's important, but it's not a game that revolutionizes much from the point of view of visual language or technology, more in size than in technology, let's say. But from the point of view of narrative, role of narrative can be very interesting, and hence, as you were hinting, the relationship with other media, where the cyberpunk theme was born in literature, and the role it has played in cinema a lot, and a little bit also in comics, and now in video games. So maybe I'll start. I have some slides, and I'll start sharing them. Yes. Yeah. So, and well, first of all, maybe Pierluigi, we could start talking a bit about the history of cyberpunk quickly. I mean, the term and the genre, as for as much as you can define something precisely, which you usually cannot. But actually, in the case of cyberpunk, we have some quite well-defined features, and and I think you have to be precise in the sense that it has some features which make it quite specific, and is a subgenre of science fiction. But in fact, the literature where it was born has some really specific features. And in my opinion, and looking at the history and the literature, of course, Philip K. Dick plays a major role, though he plays a major role in setting up the settings and the language features and some concepts in the language. But notice one thing, which makes it, in fact, not exactly, in my opinion, a cyberpunk author, that in Philip K. Dick, one strong feature is that he plays a lot on the fact that there is a strict boundary between humans and not humans. In fact, the Voigt-Kampff test serves exactly to define that. So you say, well, why is there a test if there is such a precise distinction? Because one thing is the nature of the distinction, one thing is detecting the distinction. But the test is refined and tries hard to find where is the boundary, but once it's established, it is established. In fact, if you think, one of the recurrent themes of Philip K. Dick writings is that, for example, in this dystopian future, is like the love of humans for genuine animals. This is an interesting point. In fact, in the story inspiring Blade Runner, which is a beautiful novel, which we'll come to it in a coming slide. But so this fact of the search for genuine living animals instead of android animals, and they have this enormous value, is a message. Philip K. Dick's dense language is filled with messages, and in fact, he's a literary master, and his references were so wide, from Dante to Shakespeare. He had in-depth knowledge of classical literature. He wasn't just he wasn't at all a technological nerd. And so yes, he defined lots of an atmosphere, a setting, and lots of concepts, but I wouldn't call him a cyberpunk author. And in fact, so formally, you can define cyberpunk as a genre where defined by the fact that you have modifications of the human body, integration with technology, and by hacking. So, like for example, it's normal in cyberpunk literature that you can store consciousness on a digital device like a USB stick of today, and and this immersion in a society which is sort of used to be dystopian, a society based on surveillance and where like corporations and advertisements guide everybody's lives and have more authority than governments. But actually, as a genre, I think there are some features. I mean, I'm also being a bit silly here, but that are really crucial for cyberpunk. And for me, the most crucial one that goes across genres and media is the fact that it has to be nighttime. It has to be dark, and this in particular in non-Japanese, in Western non-Japanese cyberpunk. Japanese cyberpunk has its own genre. I haven't said too much in detail. I've seen the comics and the movies, but it has a visual language also a bit different. And another important thing in cyberpunk is the urban space and the city. And again, of course, it must be dark and should rain frequently. And this, of course, is a space that represents this dystopian society. It often has like sort of Asian settings, a lot of Asian populations. Again, for some authors, this is a reflection of the old, you would say, fear of Asia. That's a possible interpretation. And of course, there's a lot of, in this decaying society where there is no social cohesion, there is a lot of violence and a lot of crime. So this is, I think, one way to characterize the setting and the definition of cyberpunk. And so one thing, one theme which I'd like to maybe we could discuss is cyberpunk across genres. In fact, because here we have to somehow focus on video games, and the relationship between video games and other media has always been quite problematic. In fact, there's a tradition and fear among players where each time we hear that a game is derived from a book, a series, or horror from a movie. Because let's say that this it hasn't been a history of successes, and in fact there is it's almost a joke, but the ET game from the movies is considered the worst game of all times. And in fact, if somebody can go and check the Netflix documentary, the developer of the ET game is a fantastic guy, and he tells the story of how he had to develop on his own in 3 months a game taken from a huge movie production, and so of course it wouldn't result. It's even too good for the amount of resources that he had available. But anyway, there are exceptions. And the exceptions are quite notable. And in fact, one of the exceptions is Do Android's Dreams of Electric Sheep 2, which is the original beautiful story of Philip K. Dick, from which came a beautiful movie, Blade Runner, which in fact what's interesting is also that Philip K. Dick story is really short. It's a really short story, but it has much wider set of themes that only some of them are dealt with in the Blade Runner, but some of them are in the Blade Runner 2, the follow-up movie. But for our ends, for our aims, what is most interesting is that there is a beautiful video game derived from that, which by itself is not. It's a game from 1997, with beautiful graphics, which for the time by itself is quite a remarkable result, and that very recently has been made available again on GOG. It's a site that does this, and I really encourage you to play it, and it works really well. So why let's say the first idea comes to mind when designing a video game from a movie doesn't work very well, because we know watching a movie or reading a book and playing a game means that you're rebuilding a world in your mind, of course, and that's why so many times if you see a movie after you read the book, you're not happy about that, because of course in your mind you've created a shiny world which is different from the one you see from the movie, and so you're not happy about it. But the designer of these games, who did so many things right in the game, but one notable thing from the point of view of narrative, which again I hope is a theme that will link my random observations, is that the story of the game is not the story of the movie or the book. So this is really brilliant. So they took the setting, they took the characters, but the main character of the video game is another Blade Runner. So it's not a Deckard, it's another Blade Runner. So it's a different story. There are some intersections which of course give depth to the story and make it really nice. And so this is brilliant by doing this. And notice that this also means that they had the courage to do this, and also means that the media has a dignity. They're also asserting this, because it means that it can tell its own kind of story without needing to mimic the other media. So I think it's an interesting case. And now I will keep talking, Pierluigi. So if you want to remark on anything, I'll be happy to stop for a moment. And
Sure, Pietro. No. Go ahead. And as soon as I have a remark, maybe I raise my hand not to break your flow. Okay, but please go ahead, because I think it's really interesting for our audience.
So now coming to the official birth of Cyberpunk, William Gibson, the Romancer, is a reference literary work, and now he's not Philip K. Dick, okay, but it's still a style that really has a lot of flow and lots of creativity, and it's on the word. But one thing I think that's interesting and also made Cyberpunk age a bit is the fact that and he takes it from Philip K. Dick, is the fact that they use language as a strong sort of baptism in the sense that there is a continuous use of new terms and names for technology, which they're unexplained but just assumed and used. And so the user will have this continuous projection of new technology, new ways of merging stuff, new use of technology, these new terms. And so this builds this continuous world building where technology mixes with our human intuitions. So in a way, it's a cyberpunk. And he clearly uses his technique in writing, and it's the same in Philip K. Dick. In fact, there's a beautiful site on the internet where you can find all the objects and inventions that Philip K. Dick hinted at, and it's 234 pages of inventions and things and devices. And Gibson does this too. I think this is very typical of the cyberpunk style, and this works better on paper because you don't have to show. So you're just stimulating the mind of the reader and his and her imagination, and this can be a limit in other medium. Okay. A friend of mine, Dene Giardini, he's discussed his particularly focused on comics, the history of comics, and he made this interesting remark, I think, that cyberpunk is somehow science fiction compression of an expansion. One thing that characterizes cyberpunk is instead of having this optimistic view, which in much science fiction and this expanding universe and this bright future is actually that the technology will, and more than technology, it's corporation expanding power in the future will lead to big problems, which of course was one of the main focus of both Philip K. Dick and the cyberpunk authors. And again, this is something that with time has a bit lost strength, and so it's a problem when you're using this theme today.
Although, Pietro,
So,
sorry, just a brief interruption. Although there is even a science fiction from the 50s, for example, Space Merchant by Paul and Korblet, that was already recognizing, so to speak, for example, the advent of the big corporations becoming bigger than even states. And it's interesting that, for example, that part of not so optimistic science fiction from the 50s and the 60s initially was not so successful. But today, we're mostly reading that kind of fiction rather than the optimistic space opera that you were alluding to. That was, of course, very entertaining at the moment, but didn't age so well, I would say.
Yeah. And in fact, so probably it's not that so much the ideological part, but the settings that characterizes this. As I told you, it's not. and in fact, the one thing that for sure Blade Runner had a huge influence. So even if it's not does not fit perfectly in the genre, but still the setting, the town, the urban space, and the fog, the atmosphere that has had. I mean, that was not the intention of the author. The intention was to represent Philip K. Dick's book and story and tell its own story, but it did create such a very important reference. For example, the fact of having this skyscraper with these huge ads, neon ads, we see that in every cyberpunk setting.
That's
Apart
more,
from the
that's more Ridley Scott than Philip K. Dick, in fact.
yeah.
It was the director's vision in terms of the visual
Yes.
imagery that he could translate. I mean, because Gibson is very visual, but Ridley Scott really added something of his own on this.
Yes. In fact, he should be set as one of the maybe involuntary but creators of the genre. Anyway, so this is a little reference to the Japanese cyberpunk, but time is running really fast. So let's get to the specific of Cyberpunk 2077. Now, first of all, CD Projekt Red. So the developers of the game actually have a very interesting story in the sense that they come from really far from selling pirate copies of CDs during the communist Polish regime, and then finally being able to sell authorized copies after the change of government form, and then slowly becoming first a localizer and then actually a producer of the game. So I mean, yes, things can evolve fast, but production with this depth usually have some experience and a lot of history behind it. And but also talking about video game across media, of which Cyberpunk is an interesting example. They know what they're doing there, and because they are the developers of The Witcher. The Witcher is a very important video game narrative, actually narrative, and or somehow hiddenly narrative video game in which you can see they have the skills for creating large universe with a coherent narrative and with a high quality narrative. And this is totally non-trivial in video games, and requires some really specific skills and focus. Now, I haven't read the fiction, the books about, so I cannot say anything about the books about The Witcher. I tried to look at the series, which is so-so, but I played the game, which is really remarkable. And this also is interesting in the sense that anybody who let's say reads a lot of novels and sees a lot of series and plays a lot of video games knows very well that the average writing quality in the fields is very different. So in the average writing quality in games is very low, not only in the quality of writing but also in the themes. So adult themes, which are absolutely normal to be dealt with in any Netflix series, are completely avoided in video games, and like normally we're below teen lit kind of level, but not with them. And like I have not at all a passion for fantasy and not at all a passion for combat games. And this is how The Witcher superficially presents to you. So but then if you actually start playing it, that's only a thin layer above a skill for storytelling, even of short stories, and the being very careful in the quality of the integration of the gameplay, the situation, and most of all the characters. You know that if characters are well done, then the story can flow. In fact, the critics' reviews of the game are so surprised by the fact that it's a rare case where the side quest quality is just as high, maybe higher than the main quest quality. But this is, I think, is not by chance. Is because the writer room, because there are writers' room like in the series in this kind of productions, puts so much investment in the quality of writing and storytelling. So every line is somehow, you feel that has been thought of and is being connected to the setting and the narrative design, because in games, writing is connected to the dynamic of the situation, of the state of the player, of the situation. It's a very complex thing. It's really well done and curated. So I think I haven't played Cyberpunk 2077, but from the first reviews, which I read yesterday and today, it's clear that this is one of the skills that can save the game. And so anyway, I think playing The Witcher. Yes.
Sorry, very quick question. Do you think that, in your view, of course, that this psychological depth of the quality of writing for these particular games has something in relation with the Polish tradition of cinema that is very much about psychological insight? I think that although the two words tend to be separated, probably in this case there was some influence looming. What do you think?
You know, I think this kind of suspicions is almost always confirmed in the sense you can't not fake depth in writing. This is anybody who has tried writing short story novels, they know that a good novel is always the tip of the iceberg of a lot of research work and skills, and this lack of awareness, which in video games, so the lack of enough attention investment on the narrative side makes for its explanation why of the very low level of narrative quality. But they clearly don't do this mistake. There's an enormous investment in the narrative part, and so the fact that there are technical bugs, I mean, even in The Witcher, sometimes your horse is flying instead of going into the ground. It's clear that their focus is, of course, I mean, they have the means to do everything correctly, but it probably takes some time. But it's clear that they have the intelligence of the management to focus lots of energy on the narrative part. Management, which it's it's not devoid of problems, severe problems that have come out, even in this production, which was promised to be crunch free, but it seems that it hasn't been. So another, and also there some, so there is this quality of writing does not mean that every of the themes which are quite delicate in Cyberpunk, because there are many themes, for example, linked to gender and race, because of course it's modular characters and everything. You have to be careful there. It seems that sometimes they have not worked with the sufficient depth as it could be, which of course it's easy to say from the outside, when you're not when you're not the one that has to generate this enormous dynamic world, because it's not just the fact that you have to write a lot of text, it's the fact that this text has to be coherent with a dynamically changing situation, which leads us to another theme, which is this: in The Witcher, in The Witcher you had, well, let's keep this for a moment. In The Witcher you have a main character, which is let's say extremely a very strong character, very interesting character, and you live the adventure through this character, okay? And so this already gives you a feeling of depth, and even if you don't resemble this character at all. Now, one of the problems I see with that could be unsolved, I haven't played it, it makes Cyberpunk even more difficult to write, is that it's a role-playing game. So you can define your own role. Now, probably, yes, you can define your own role, but you're immersing this role in the same storyline. So in the sense that that the situation is dynamic enough that it allows for you to go through certain kinds of events without having them to be rewritten for each character. Maybe somebody who's not in games would think that games have a much more dynamic kind of generation of content. It is not so, because it wouldn't have any literary quality. So games that want to have, an effective storytelling are just scripted. They're scripted from start to end, and that's how you do it. So in a way, it's quite close to writing scripts for movies, but scripts and dialogues. You just have to write them down. They won't be generated. But then once you have them, or while you have them, if you're lucky and you have a really integrated team, which they did, I will come to it. And it's another necessary feature that your big narrative game development studio must have. Then, but you can meet them while you're developing it. But still, it's not generated unless it's like a MMO where the interaction is actually the social interaction of the players, but then it's not you scripting the interaction and dialogues, it's the players actually doing that. But in this very interesting interview with the lead writer, and in a game where a narrative plays such an interesting role, he clearly tells us that they have done this integration of of all the production levels, and then everything is directed by the narrative content as it should be. I don't know, like 10 or even more years ago, there's been this big discussion in games where the narrative was ruining games fun or not, and sort of my impression was the discussion ended up with saying yes, narrative should not get in the way of the mechanics, but in fact, it's historically it has happened exactly the opposite. Narrative has become more and more important and widely used in all kinds of games and the way storytelling goes. In fact, I think so. If you take The Witcher, it's not a very innovative. Yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I interrupt you, Joe, just to play my role as the timekeeper. We have more or less 25 minutes left just for your time management of the discussion. Sorry about that.
No, cool. And I was yeah. So another thing to notice in this integrated narrative design that we were talking about is how. So their quality and what I think one can learn from them as a game designer and game writer is how they manage to do the right delivery. It's not hurried up. Their side quest, even if the side quest takes its time, everything is written and the tools, the things that you have to find make sense, and it's kind of what we call the right delivery in cinema and theater. And the attention to this dimension is usually lacking entirely in the game design because the focus is more on the mechanics. So if they tend not to innovate much in the visual styles, they use the standard AAA neo-realistic language, which is bizarre and somehow, for me, aesthetically, it's not very interesting. But it's like a standard language. So if you go into a AAA game, you sort of expect to have this rough 3D models which give you this sense of uncanny valley. But of course, after a little while, you just forget and you're immersed in the experience. And in all this, their games are quite standard. So I think it's more in the detail of the storytelling that you can find something very unique. Well, in the detail storytelling and in the dimension of the world. That's another thing which it's totally non-trivial to manage and scale. Yeah, this is what a slide about what I was just saying. And in fact, the fact that things, you have walls that you don't see, you can go across, is something that is by now accepted in this kind of 3D environments, and you just keep going and you're not too worried about that. This is standard for gamers. Okay, now physically, so I mean in detail, the another smart thing I think they did, which games that tries to have depth, is to rely on other media. So again, this game doesn't start from a void, not only from this tradition of Cyberpunk, but more in detail from a role-playing board game, Cyberpunk 2013, I think originally was called, then it was called to Cyberpunk 2020, and of course they had to change the name because 2020 is way more wild a year than any Cyberpunk book has depicted. And but the role-playing game also seems a very interesting one because it's just one book, and in the book itself, it's written in a cyberpunk style. So this is an interesting point. You see how all the dimensions somehow are made coherent, and this is something probably that makes you a good experience. And with the release of Cyberpunk, they're also again going across media because they're releasing short stories, they're releasing a comic book, and they're re-releasing also the role-playing game. So this shows how smart you can be in moving across media. Technologically, the quality of every little detail has been illustrated and designed. So this has been a huge work, which we are looking from the outside. Would be dishonest not to recognize how much work goes into this. Me being a developer, I don't want even to imagine the effort that is required to do this and the passion. And so the Ready the Witches, we're talking about hundreds of hours of gameplay, and it's a lot. Now, problems. There are some things that they may be just marketing stints, but this fact, even in The Witcher, this fact that it's so much, the quality and the effort is so much centered on the narrative, is not something that marketing usually tries to put in evidence. So even in the trailer, they always say how much they care about the narrative, but then they do these stints but the reviews are saying that they're just stints and they don't. They haven't spent too much effort in that, and the game still can be a pleasant experience. So yeah, I was just playing on the fact that we're asking the game itself how loyal it is to the cyberpunk ideals, and you already said about the fact that it goes across media, and the problem of not having a main character that just me, the nerd player, will try to be the main character here. This from the point of view of creating an effective playing immersive story experience can be more problematic. I think instead of being less problematic. And these are two interesting reviews. Now the title makes them look as a negative review, but they aren't. In the sense that there are problems, there are defects coming from the fact that Cyberpunk has become a bit old, and the themes of Cyberpunk are not. They predicted the future so well that for us. I think it's today's. Societies are controlled more by corporations, and also our personal lives are controlled and in a surveillance states way more than by corporations than by states, and corporations can be more influential than states, and the economic model that we adopted is breaking social cohesion, and these are all facts. And this is the kind of society that we are developing, and so that's not so surprising. The fact that we have bodies which are integrated with digital devices. Well, you just have to think what happens to you when you can't find your phone, and the panic. And the sensation, deep disturbing sensation that you can find what used to be a telephone. You can see how much the digital life has been integrated. Like, for example, a few weeks ago, I had to write in continuous writing some notes, and I can no longer do that. I can only write in square blocks, and I've completely lost the skill. And I think our body has changed, and digital is way more digital integration, even if in less spectacular ways, but maybe deeper ways. And this is why maybe we feel that future depicted by Cyberpunk is not so interesting any longer. But it's more like a retro fascination, at least a feeling, than a future fascination. And yes.
I think an interesting question from our audience. Pietro, do you think that having Keanu Reeves portraying Johnny Silverhand in the game has boosted the Cyberpunk 2077 hype?
Well, I'm yeah, for sure. I mean, having such a nice and ultra famous guy. Now, I must say that the world of gamers has its own logic. Like if you have if for example something happened to me, if you have your game on the New York Times, you would say, okay, that's a great way to improve the sales of your game. No, that will not change your sales at all compared to just having like a promotion on Steam or on some store. So the gaming world has its own logic, but in the nerdy some of the nerdy audience will have greatly appreciated that. And I read from the reviews that in fact the in-game representation of him is in fact extremely well done and interesting. Again, we see how the role of the writer's room can play a crucial role in changing the success and effectiveness of the game. Yeah. So about these reviews, so I mean the titles, of course, titles are, but if you read that anyway, the again the quality of the game seems to be exactly like in the case of The Witcher. So the way that the storytelling works, the side quests work, the characters that you meet work seems to be very very effective. Yeah, one thing you would hope that I mean familiarity with Cyberpunk would have made them work a lot and in depth is the themes of gender and transgender and having dealing with this theme in a meaningful and not as something superficial just to make it I don't know, spectacular or to be so to make it existentially revealing and widen your understanding and experience, but it seems they haven't done this. And again, I think there's something very traditional in the way of writing and composing games. So I would not expect too much innovation from this kind of company. We must also always consider that this is a huge corporate production, which is extremely ironic if you think about it, because it's a Cyberpunk game is produced by the very same large corporations which are the critical theme of Cyberpunk itself traditionally. And so of course the management of these productions, their only end is to minimize risk, and so they will do. So their role is this, and so you have to always consider this Disney-like boundaries that you can pass or not, but you have to go against a lot of bureaucracy, and. Yeah, and another big problem, this is really unnecessarily and just a sign of incompetent management, is the heavy use of crunch, which was not occasional but systematic in the end. And this, I think, is something that it is well known. Old studies know that crunch does not increase productivity, decreases enormously the quality of a game, and all the bugs are being reported. Maybe they're linked to this. So it means it's not only bad management, but management does not have a culture for how to maximize quality and productivity at the same time. So this is not cool at all, I think. So anyway, I don't think that this game will end up in a dump, in a landfill. There are so many qualities to what these guys have been doing. But So the just that it's not a game about the future, but it's a game about the future as it was seen in the past. Because I think that today's future is has to be imagined, and it has to be more different from today, at least we hope.
Well, Pietro, thank you for this amazing presentation. I think we really put on the table so many things that we could not possibly discuss, not even in 3 hours. But you were hinting at the irony of cyberpunk being basically taken over by the large corporation it was meant to criticize. But in the end, it wasn't the case as well with punk itself, because think of punk itself that became a sort of asset for, let's say, high fashion. With Vivian Westwood and so on and so forth. Is this inevitable? What do you think? You think that basically every kind of, let's say, disruptive or frontier kind of subculture is bound to be absorbed by the big economic powers that basically set the scene, or there could be a way out from this point of view, also from the gamers community viewpoint?
Well, first of all, I would say that the fact that that your living is made through a corporations, which is true by now for like a majority of the population, does not mean that you cannot be sincere in criticizing the mechanics of the corporation itself. I mean, otherwise this would be ridiculous. I mean, the fact that the fact that I'm monopolizing stores online owned by a single guy who does not mean that I cannot try to change the rules of society so that this monopoly is no longer one. So I think there is a confusion of levels and of responsibilities, and but another thing is the Disneyification of a message. That's a thing, and I don't have an answer. In the sense, I don't know if it's possible to keep your critical sense alive even in this kind of organization. One thing I can say is that it's extremely rare that managers of this kind of production managers have the courage to risk. I mean, we had Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was an incredible exception. He liked to take risks, and he dared, and sometimes he failed, and sometimes he changed the life of all of us. But that's not exactly the standard manager.
And he was kind of a dictator, by the way.
Yes.
Nobody
Crunch was normal.
Everybody can afford that. And by the way, in the end, even in the 70s, the radical cinema that took over Hollywood in the 70s, in the end, actually took it over from the inside. So maybe, yeah, I agree that there's no need to make this a stark contraposition between, let's say, the big money and radical culture. Sometimes they can go hand in hand. And I think it's also a responsibility of the artists to empower themselves, to enable them to be in the position to dictate the rules, or at least to negotiate some space for expression. We have a very intriguing question. Pietro, do you think that only good-looking women could be a problem?
Well, in fact, I put a slide here in the definition of cyberpunk. One thing is that men can be of all size, and fat and thin and small and tall and gigantic, but women are almost all thin, athletic, and extremely sporty, and extremely standardized, beautiful Barbies, but made with black hair and or blue. Yeah, it's totally. I think it's totally a problem. And while here the main character, can be customized, I'm not sure that you're asking the right game and the right people to. I mean, no, it's perfectly fine to ask. I'm not sure that they have the courage and the freedom to sort of go against this, because there are many other indie games that represent gender relationships in a way more interesting way, and maybe you could go and look and try to play them and see what they're doing. Still, I think we should ask them, and we should ask them all the time. Why? I mean, stereotypical representation, at least across gender. Of course, we want to see movies with beautiful people because we want to fantasize, but maybe not only. And the concept of beauty is debatable, and maybe one should have the same standards for men and women and all.
So we could say, Pietro, that in some sense this game is, in a gender perspective, a male imaginary, a projection of male imaginary, or do you think that this is going too far in this regard?
I think we should play it before saying that, but I suspect there still are many aspects of it. But that's a suspicion which may be completely wrong. I would try to play it before judging. It's very bad to judge something that you don't know well.
Of course. But do you think that more generally there is a male imaginary problem in the gaming world?
It's a huge, it's enormous. It's like an elephant, and it's not even an elephant. It's a mammoth. It's so enormous and normal and standardized that, I mean, it makes me laugh to think that it's not there. But still, I mean, I'm not at all a moralistic. I mean, it's fine, but I mean, I'm at least in my games, I'm trying to evolve the message. But still, I still remember these are fantasy worlds. So there's always the fact that you want to and you need to reach a large audience, and also people should not be forced to implement their political correctness program of anybody else. So one has to, I think, to strike a balance there. In particular, I try to write satirical and comic games, so I feel a lot when there is the pressure to put a moralistic side to what I'm doing, and that's very, very bad. And it's actually very strong in indie games sometimes with not very good results. I mean, it's a delicate thing.
So we are coming to a close. Is there any final comment that you would like to make on what's your expectation in terms of, as you said, you didn't play the game yet, but what do you expect? What do you think you will find in this game that could surprise you?
You know, I don't expect to be surprised much because I think that I mean, only because I know some things, like for this, like the sheer size and dynamic of the city itself, Night City is called. It's not a very happy name, Night City. Okay, but from a literary point of view. But anyway, but still, I think that can be very, very impressive. What I hope for is to find these storytelling skills, even telling little stories, that and the centrality of narrative in all of it. I think in this the game can play a great role in showing how the centrality narrative can give a coherence to the experience, and the fact that games have reached a maturity in this sense. That is not inferior to any other media.
Thank you so much, Pietro. And I think that's a wrap because it's 5 p.m. sharp. And so we are over with our time. Thank you also for this fantastic time management. You really managed to tuck in an incredible amount of content. And thank you all that were just listening and watching us for such a long time. And at this point, looking forward to experimenting hands-on with the game. And let's see what happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll of course give you already welcoming you in the next episodes of the IULM FLOW series. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.